Commission to order. If you have an item you wish to speak about tonight, you can get a card. I think they're back at the door still, Mark, and fill it out and bring it up to Mr. Shipley, and he will call on you when the item comes up on the agenda, or if it's not an item on the agenda, it will be at the public forum, which is later on in the meeting. But you will be called upon, and like I said, if it is an item that's on the agenda, it will be at that time. We'll start with the approval of the agenda.
Yes, the staff recommends approval of the agenda with the removal of agenda items 3 and 4. We did not have any plan revisions for those two items.
Do I have a motion?
To approve the amended agenda.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Approval of the minutes of the April 20th, 2023 meeting.
Staff recommends approval.
Move for approval. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We move on to item number 5, discussion and public hearing on a site plan for the Knoxville, Tennessee Temple, 13001 Kingston Pike, Zone C-1, 5.26 acres, Moody Nolan applicant.
Yeah, this particular item involves a request for site plan approval for a piece of property. It's for a regional event temple for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It's on a parcel that's west of Christ's Covenant Presbyterian Church, kind of in the western part of town along Kingston Pike. And it's just to the east of the Fast Pace urgent care facility that was completed a few months ago. This property is about 5.26 acres. It's all zone general commercial. It has frontage on both Kingston Pike and Fleener Road. As you can see on the site layout sheet, they are providing walking trails along the full length of Kingston Pike's frontage and Fleener Road frontage, and connections into the site with sidewalks and walking trails. They do have an access that stubs into and connects to the access that was stubbed into this property when the Fast Pace Urgent Care was developed. And then they're proposing to wrap the circulation around the building, because again, this is really designed as an event center. It would be for, individuals. It's not really open to the general public. So they are proposing their own access along the eastern part of the development. And that particular access is shown as a full access. It's roughly 307 feet from the access that is at the urgent care facility. There are no accesses on the south side of Kingston Pike in the immediate area. But because Kingston Pike is a major arterial street that requires 400 feet of separation between driveways, they are at 307 feet, and so they would be requesting a variance from that requirement of 93 feet, and that would need to be acted on separately before we act on the site plan. And I can review that a little bit more in a minute. Another element of the site, let me just show you you can see this on the screen. It kind of shows the other development in the general area. You got the parking lot for Christ's Covenant over here, and up here to the north is Fleener Road, Cool Springs Estates subdivision. And of course down here is Kingston Pike, the urgent care facility here to the west. One of the things that the staff had as an initial comment when we looked at this was, there's a requirement that's in our zoning ordinance now for connectivity, vehicular and pedestrian, cross-lot connectivity to sidewalk systems that are associated with property. But it is based on the context, and the Planning Commission does have the ability to consider the context, which would involve elements like the surrounding plan of development, topography, and things like that when they're reviewing connectivity. They are providing, obviously the Walker Trail connectivity element. They do connect into Fast Pace to the west. They did not agree with and do not want to have a connection to the property to the east. And the reason that was originally suggested by staff was that when this property develops, and it's only about 1.3 acres, and it does have an existing driveway here about middle way through the property. If they have an access, it's going to be within the 400 feet as well. So they'll also need a variance if it's not tied into this particular access. So that was kind of the logic behind that. We talked about this internally and with the applicant. And in looking at the topography here, there's a pretty good grade change between these two properties. In fact, there's a lot of retaining walls on this development due to topography. And to tie that in would really create a lot of improvements in grading in this general part of this parcel. And really this is the most developable part of this parcel, because as you get further east, you start getting into a large drainage area. So we were comfortable, given the topography and the context, with after looking at that more closely, not requiring that particular connection at this time in that particular context. And when the properties develop, on the south side of Kingston Pike, we can try to work with those property owners and developers to try to line up with this access to lessen any potential conflicts in the center turn lane. So that's a couple of things that were talked about. I know they talked about that at the staff developer meeting on May the 2nd. Another thing that's unique to this building is its height. For one thing, it's 122 feet high from grade. That's all the way up to the top of the steeple from the grade, adjacent grade of the building, around the building. And then they are proposing uplighting to kind of give the building a glow at night, and they're going to time that lighting. This image here is what you would see up until I think 11 p.m. and then after 11 it gets even more dim. It's kind of it's uplighting, which we do allow, but it would be behind parapets that are arranged around the building, and the lighting themselves is also going to be screened, so that really the light that comes out of the fixture is just hitting the building only, and there's no glare coming out from the side. So that's another thing that was kind of unique to this project and discussed at the staff developer meeting. As far as the height, when you look at the building, the habitable portions of the building are within the 35-foot height requirements. This upper part is all part of the steeple, and it's exempt from the height requirements under the height section of Chapter 4 of our zoning ordinance. So that's kind of how that is coming into play with this particular building. They're proposing a segmental wall, retaining wall. It's a little bit hard to see on that screen, but it was included in the packet for their retaining wall system. It would be going around quite a bit of the project. And these are just some elevations of the building, looking from different perspectives. The upper image is from Kingston Pike, and then you got an image from Fleener Road. Again, some other images of the building. There was a traffic impact study prepared for this. It did not indicate that there would be a significant impact based on this development. It did mention that we might want to look at eventually a signal at Hobbs Road and Kingston Pike, but it wouldn't be triggered by this particular project. So that's some of the highlights of this particular request. Like I said earlier, they are requesting a variance from the distance between driveways requirement. The staff, town engineer reviewed this, and we're comfortable with the access they're showing. We talked a little bit about a right-in, right-out with the applicant, and frankly, a right-in, right-out is always more safe for any location, anywhere. But we felt comfortable that the full access that they're proposing in this time was reasonable. If there is any access, any development on the property to the east, given its size, it's very likely to not be a heavy traffic generator. And again, we can try to look at the south side of Kingston Pike when those parcels are developed to try to coordinate access so that it lines up with their proposed access, and lessens the potential for conflicts in the center turn lane of Kingston Pike. So I think that's an overview of the main items. We talked a little bit about extending the walking trails all the way to the property lines. They are doing that. They're going to have to coordinate this particular section here along Fleener with both the town and Christ Covenant here. There's a sidewalk walking trail that comes down along Christ Covenant's property to a point, but then you've got this area here where there's a drainage way, and there we'd have to extend some culverts to get a facility across that particular section of Fleener. But it is important, to move toward getting that all tied in, because like you said, you've already got the facility all the way along Christ Covenant's frontage on Fleener Road. So, and we've talked with the representatives from the applicant, and they're in agreement with working with the town and with Christ Covenant to try to accomplish that. So if any of y'all have any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer those. We do have some representatives from the applicant here if you have more specific or technical questions.
Mark, are they gonna have to dedicate right-of-way on the Fleener Road side of this?
We'll have to do a plat, but it's not a subdivision plat. It will be a plat to establish the access easement, because they'll have an access easement here between them and Fast Pace, and then they'll also have to establish the walking trail easements, both along Kingston Pike and Fleener. So that would be part of what we would look at when that's when that plat's submitted.
So the walking trail will be our responsibility after it'll be dedicated to us?
After the 2-year maintenance,
Okay.
yeah. Both walking trail sections, yeah.
Mark, I don't think I saw a lighting drawing. I assume there's parking lot lighting?
Have short parking lot lights, and they're all decorative. I don't know if you could see the detail. I don't know if Daniel, if y'all want to speak to
Yeah, I
that.
saw some of the, looked like a description. I couldn't read some of it, but it looked like a description of the fixtures, but I didn't see any lumens at the edge of property, that kind of thing that we normally
They
look at.
do have that. I don't have it in the PowerPoint, but they did have an ISO foot
Okay,
candle
okay,
map, and
all
they're
right, you guys are
almost zero at the property lines on virtually all locations.
You're good, I'm good.
Yep, there's actually
Could you
two
please-
electrical engineers involved with the lights. They're very concerned about minimizing the above-ground objects, so.
Could you
the lighting-
please tell us who you are and
I am Daniel Butte with Los Design.
give us an address?
I just moved, so that's a challenge.
A business address.
1255 Branson Avenue, Knoxville, Tennessee. Proud new North Knox resident, sorry.
Thank you. Okay, go ahead.
I just wanted to make sure you guys know, there are a couple of the 22-foot high parking lights to minimize the number of poles. We've got some 12-footers for the pedestrian access paths and some low-level bollard lights for the plazas. And I think there's 2 photometric sheets in there that both align.
There was one comment that we had in the staff conditions dealing with the lighting, that to ensure that all the external lighting conceals the light source so that there's no glare.
Right, I remember that. I didn't see
And they're very much aware of that, as we've met with them a few times about lighting.
Mark, I can see you've got a a note on here about the Fleener Road walking trail alignment to be able to have some flexibility. I do want to point out that along Fleener Road, probably inside the existing right-of-way as well as outside the right-of-way on their particular property, there are some pretty big oak trees that are right there that that line across Cool Springs. Actually, it's villas. Anything that we can do to help meander that walking trail to avoid, number one, cutting down those. And when I say big, they're big oaks. I mean, I bet some of them are 36 inches in diameter, and
No, that's good.
and also, what we can do to try to limit the disturbance in the drip line. Obviously, there has to be some disturbance in there, and I can see they've gone to great lengths with some retaining walls and so forth to eliminate any kind of grading in there. But and you've got a note on the plan, but I did want to go
Add that.
on the record.
Yeah, we can add that as an addition, part of that particular note if you want.
Well,
just
it
to
is
make
actually
sure
in the
that we-
plan, but I just there are some old oak trees that if
Yeah,
they
we
could
would
be
wanna
saved,
avoid those,
that are directly
yeah.
across the street from the entrance of Cool Springs,
Yeah.
I think it would behoove us to try to save those oak trees.
I totally
So
agree.
where would that go in the subject tos?
Well, we could either add it. There is a note on the plans that I'm looking at that does talk about that final alignment will be adjusted to avoid existing trees. I just wanted to go on the record.
Okay.
just
number
because
11.
I know a lot of those Cool Springs homeowners over there, and I know that was something that they're concerned about ultimately someday when this property gets developed. So what's going to happen to all those big oak trees? Obviously, they know a lot of tree cover is going to go, and that's part of
Yeah.
progress.
Can we add that statement to the number 11 then?
Well, we sure could.
Yeah, that'd be fine. I can add some language in there about ensuring that we
Well, just as
provide
long as
a
they work with
location
staff to try to
save
come
those.
up with the
those trees.
Mature
the
trees.
the lesser of bad choices. How about that? I mean, we
Yeah,
know
we
it
can
needs to be done, and the walking trail is important along Felino Road, but there might be a way just to try to be gentle as much as we can. I mean, we're only dealing with about 35 feet. It's a narrow road in there, so a lot of those trees are actually probably the big ones are probably actually in the right of way.
Yeah.
So they probably shouldn't get disturbed unless Felino Road ever gets widened in that section.
Right.
But nevertheless, if we could just include it as
Yeah.
a note in there, and that way there's no ambiguity, and hopefully when they're ultimately determine the placement of that, they can get the staff involved and figure out the path of least resistance.
Yeah, I think you need to pay close attention to it prior to it coming to the Visual Resources Review Board for the landscape plan.
I'm not sure when we'll get to the design or the specifics of that trail connection through that particular section, but if we see a concern with it, we can certainly bring it back to the planning commission. But you know me, I'm going to try to save the trees, especially significant oak trees like that.
Me too. Well, I mean, we've
Yeah,
only got
Daniel's
35
the
feet
same way.
a swath to work with in there, and you can only do so much trying to get what is that, a 10,
Just
it's a
have to
10
get-
foot or an 8 foot wide trail?
I have to
Eight.
use a small section of a natural trail or something that gets a connection, but.
And I would
is-
support that. If all of a sudden, if it was maybe more of a mulch trail.
Yeah,
and,
for just a
because
small
to be able to
section.
put asphalt
Yeah.
down, you've got to go through and strip the topsoil out and get some kind of subgrade
Mm-hmm.
that is stable enough to hold the asphalt. So
Yeah.
I guess I'm just encouraging some flexibility with that. So try to save those big oak trees.
Yeah, because there's pretty much the rest of that site, and there's some big trees on this site. It's,
Mark, there's a tree demolition sheet in there somewhere. Does that address those trees that we're talking about here?
Well,
no.
they're probably
because they're in
identified.
the
I didn't think
buffer.
it did. Huh? Oh, they're in the.
They're
right.
probably identified. Basically, anything over 10 inches diameter, other than if there's some red buds or some dogwoods. But basically, they're probably already identified. Now, if they're in the right of way, they're probably not identified.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fall within the 35-foot buffer. There is a 35-foot buffer along Fleener Road between the improvements and the right-of-way of Fleener Road.
You're right, may need to be soft to
Yeah, so-
prevent damage to the drip line.
Yeah, and there's a good pedestrian connection on the other side of Fleener, for somebody pushing a baby stroller or something like that. So,
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah, we'll absolutely take a close look at that.
Okay. Thank you,
So
Mark.
it's-
and we appreciate the applicant working with that.
That's a good comment. Appreciate you saying that.
Has Rural Metro looked at this site?
Yeah, a
plan?
couple of the comments in in these conditions are from the fire inspector.
In particular, I was wondering if they looked at it relative to the setback of the, the tallest part of the structure is kind of set back. So from access
They
to
looked
the
at the
large
plan,
ladder
so
trucks or something
if
like
they
that.
didn't have a comment about it, I think it's a type 2 construction. It's a pretty much all masonry building, all, what is it, granite?
It is, yeah.
I mean, it is not
a
going to be
100-year
very
building.
combustible.
Can you get up?
Yeah, it is a 100-year building. It's all granite veneer, steel studding. It's going to be here longer than any of the other buildings in town.
Probably more than 100 years,
It
I'd say,
is.
the way that you're
They call
building.
it that, but I don't think we're going to see the end of that. Yeah.
Is the fire marshal kind of comfortable with the gates and if there was a fire and they needed
Had a
after hours
comment-
access, is that all kind of been worked through?
Yeah, he had a comment about the gate number 17, well, not 17. See which one it was. So the Knox box, there's a certain model that he's recommending.
Okay. So you have a key.
There were a couple of logistical comments about the gates dealing with the mailbox, for example, location on number 8. Just how that's going to work with deliveries and so forth. But yeah, I mean, that was the only comments I had on the site were the ones that are before you.
There's a fairly large monument sign that's shown on the plan. Of course, all I'm seeing is a two-dimensional view that we want to just disclose to the applicant that that's not really something that we can approve at this body, and the footprint that you have on that particular monument sign, you may not be eligible. I mean, I haven't scaled it, but you may not be eligible for quite something quite that large. Typically, we try to not get any signage on this set of plans and then let VRB, but I'm just need to be aware that that's not necessarily something we're approving tonight, is your signage.
And that is addressed in comment number 14.
Yep.
Signage will need to be reviewed and approved by the Visual Resource Review Board. Same way with the landscape plan. The landscape plan is a forest. I mean, it's substantial. Yeah, it's a very substantial landscape plan.
This is going to be a heck of an architectural piece in the town of Farragut. I mean, I can only imagine what it cost, and it's pretty awesome that you guys are. I'm glad you chose to build it here. I know there's not many of these. You've only got maybe one other one in the state. That's a temple, and so it.
Didn't really want to fill in any gaps, but I kind of want to point out to kind of commend y'all and Mark and the planning staff, both for supporting us during this process, but also for making some hard decisions prior to this to encourage them to locate here. So I just want to kind of point out there's a lot of similarities in terms of heavy planning and kind of working with the community. So I just want to commend Mark and his staff for doing everything they can to make this as easy on all of us as we could. And yes, it is going to be a great building for everyone involved.
That'll be, like I said, it'll be a real masterpiece for really East Tennessee.
Anyone else have any questions or comments?
I do have one person that signed up to speak on this, if you're ready for that. Okay. Mary Ellen Brannon.
Hello, I'm Mary Ellen Brannon. I'm at 212 Battery Hill Circle here in Farragut. I'd like to be very clear from the outset that I am not opposed to this design or the construction of the temple. I went to the staff and developer meeting. I mean, it's really going to be something different for Farragut. But I do have some concerns with respect to the applicant's request for a variance for the distance between access points. This variance request could have a potential knock-on effect should the property to the east of the applicant's property be developed. In that scenario, the property to the east would have an access that would also be within 400 feet of the proposed access for the temple property. I believe y'all, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe during the staff and developer meeting, they indicated that this temple would be in use from Monday through Saturday every other week. So every other week, it's busy for 6 days out of that week. As you know, in recent FMPC meetings, we've had some lively discussion regarding existing town of Farragut curb cuts along Kingston Pike, which have less than 400 feet in distance between them. We know that over time, these types of situations sooner or later develop into dangerous and unsafe traffic zones. The 400-foot distance requirement exists for a reason. Again, I'll read from TDOT. Every access point constructed on the state highway system increases the crash risk. The cumulative impact of closely spaced access points over time is one of the largest contributors to high crash rates and congestion on state highway. So I heard everything they said at the staff and development meeting. This is a very tight fit on this lot. They don't have a lot of other options, I don't think, for access points, but I'd just like to say, you know, we're going to knowingly create yet another non-compliant and potentially dangerous entrance and egress on Kingston Pike in Farragut. So just something to consider. I don't have any suggestions about what they could do differently, but, you know, we've already got some issues in town with this type of situation. So, thank you.
Is that
That's all that signed up for this item.
Okay, we need to do the variance first.
I'm, just because I know this is a concern, I'm sure that you guys have probably looked at, if you go on KGIS, there's no avoiding this. From a topography standpoint, the one aspect of this that can hearten us a little bit is that the smaller property is 1.3 acres. A lot of that's not buildable, so if they put anything on there, the amount of the square footage of the building that they can build on there is going to be pretty small. But I hear you. I'm looking at this and thinking there is nowhere on their property line. They're within, even if they go all the way to the edge, they're not at 400 feet from what I can measure from the emergency care, the urgent care building. So
Their property's less than 400 feet wide.
yeah. So we're at. I don't think we have a choice, and we really don't. We can't deny someone access to their property. So
Originally, they wanted to just have their own, both of the accesses and just loop them both to Kingston Pike. And we worked with them to get this tied in so that you didn't have another access here,
Yeah.
which the staff would not have supported that. So this is kind of a compromise from what they originally had wanted to do as far as the access goes.
Comfortable with their access as presented. I just don't see a lot of traffic generated that's going to come in surges on this property or the adjacent property to the east.
Initially, whenever we discussed this in staff developer, the drawing was one lane, and they have since added the right turn and the left turn lane as far as exit lanes. And there was just an entrance lane and exit lane. The two lanes here, I think it will be a great improvement and will help minimize what we would have had if it had just been one.
Any more questions or comments?
So you're taking action on the variance? Okay.
Variance.
Move for approval of the variance on the driveway requirement.
I'll second that.
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed?
This will go to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen as far as the variance request. And of course, TDOT ultimately has to approve this access as well. So just keep that in mind.
So now we just needed a motion on the subject to.
Site plan.
Site
Yep.
plan, the subject to.
I'm going to move to approve with the amended subject tos.
I'll second.
In favor? Aye. Opposed?
Thank you all again.
Thank you.
Welcome to Knoxville.
Moving on to item number 6, discussion and public hearing on an amendment to the future land use map in the comprehensive land use plan update, December 2012, related to a portion of parcel 069, tax map 142, currently designated as medium-density residential, to change this to very low-density residential and low-density residential, and parcels 070 and 072, tax map 142, currently designated as medium residential, to change this to open space cluster residential.
Yes, this item was discussed last month for workshop purposes. And based on the feedback provided during that workshop session, the staff has put together resolution PC-23-07, which would amend two different areas that were part of the larger Boring Road study area that we made amendments to back in October of last year. The first area is about 12.6 acres, and it's between Baldwin Park, which is a small lot, single-family subdivision, and Waverly Court, which is an attached single-family subdivision. The proposed future land use designation is open space cluster. It's currently medium-density residential. The open space cluster was suggested as an option because it would provide for potentially a rezoning to something like the OSMR, open space mixed residential, where they could mix attached and detached within this parcel to help transition to these two adjacent developments. The second area that's also currently designated as medium density residential is this area here. And this is roughly 20 acres. It's part of a larger parcel that's north of Ingalls and south of Baldwin Park. And again, based on the feedback provided last month, the staff is proposing the northern, probably a little over a third, as very low density residential. This depth would allow for a street, a double loaded street of something comparable to Baldwin Park to transition to that particular development. And then in the southern two-thirds of this 20 acres would be low-density residential, which is 3 to 6 dwelling units per acre. That could be something like Waverly Court, or potentially some other type of housing, missing middle type housing that we don't really have a lot of, that would kind of transition from these more intense areas that are commercial land uses to the less intense areas to the north that are very low density residential. So that's really what this resolution recommends as far as amendments to the future land use map. The staff recommends approval of resolution PC-23-07, and I do have some individuals that have signed up to speak on this.
Does anyone on the planning commission have any questions of Mark before we move on? Okay, Mark.
You ready for the
Think so.
citizens? The first one is Michael Patterson.
Good evening. My name is Michael Patterson. I'm the Executive Vice President of Horn Properties, and I represent Doug Horn, the landowner here of this 50-acre tract that we're discussing tonight. I'll start off by saying I realize that if you take these three different parcels and combine them over the years, it feels like it's kind of been a little bit of a war zone up here, and that's potentially an understatement, quite frankly. And over the years, I've tried to be the peacekeeper and try to find a middle ground here. It wasn't long ago, I guess probably 4 months ago, I stood before you all and presented the S1 development, and I'm not going to rehash over that. I just want to simply transition into a more important statement, but by starting with that was approved by this commission 6-3, and I think even after that, we had gotten some feedback that one of the commissioners who had voted no potentially would have voted yes had he or she known what was going to be in between the parcel and Baldwin Park. When we received that approval and then were denied at the Board of Mayor Aldermen, we sat back at our offices that following Monday, and we sat down as a collective group and said, well, here we are, back to the drawing board. What will it take to truly get this through and passed over the goal line? And I told Doug, I said, Doug, ultimately, what needs to happen is full transparency. We need to take what you own there, which is 50 acres, put together a plan, sit down with the community, sit down with Baldwin Park, sit down with the people who live there, and find out ultimately what they want. So we've started that process. I've met with John Holstrager. We've had very good dialogue. I think he even had sent an email to a lot of you all mentioning that meeting. And since that meeting, we have presented to Mr. Shipley a rezoning that encompasses the entire 50 acres. And there's no multifamily. There's a small portion of S1, which, again, got approved here. And then the remainder of that is simply S3, okay? So, excuse me, R3, thank you, John. Which is conducive, Waverly Court, Baldwin, R3. We're just being a good neighbor, R3. Not a lightning rod we're throwing at you, just, okay, R3 is what it is. Talked to Mr. Holstrager, he said, yes, this is something we can get behind. So I then told Doug, I said, Doug, to do this right, I'm going to have to meet with the presidents and the homeowners associations of Village Green, Baldwin Park, Fox Den, Waverly Court, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to do this right. We're going to get the input. So although we don't agree with the changes you've presented tonight, I'm not asking you to scrap it. That's not what I'm here for. I'm simply asking this commission, allow us, since we have this new proposal in, to meet with the community. Let it be a win-win for Horn Properties, but more importantly, allow it to be a win-win for the people that are in the community, the Fox Den residents, the Baldwin Parks, the Waverly Courts, the Village Green. That's what we're doing here. Again, we're asking for R3 and S1, nothing more. This has been presented. Mark has a copy of it. I'm not asking you to scrap this idea. I'm simply asking you tonight, allow us to work through this with the people, come before you in the next 60 to 90 days with documented workshops, documented meetings with these homeowners, and say, here it is. That's all I'm asking. I'm not asking you to scrap it. I'm just simply asking you, can you table this idea and see if we can't come to a resolution between the people that live there and the current landowner? Seems pretty, I don't see how in all honesty, that's the way it is. That's the way it should be. Government shouldn't get too involved. Allow us to work it out. That's all I'm simply asking. Please ponder that. Thank you for your time. Once again, I appreciate it.
I would like to say that this is comprehensive land use plan. It's not zoning we're talking about. Anybody in the audience who maybe hasn't been to the meetings before or hasn't kept up with it, we're not talking about rezoning. We're talking about the comprehensive land use plan, which, am I correct, Mark? The comprehensive land use plan is a guide. It is not zoning.
Yeah, it's a guide. It's a guide.
And it's amendable.
Yep.
Well, it's also one of the first documents that I look at when a rezoning is before me. And to me, it's more than a guide. I think when we worked on the comprehensive land use plan, we really wanted it to somewhat be the document that gives us direction of what the future of the town looks like. So whether we call it a guide or not, I think there are some of us that that take the land use plan I don't want to say the word seriously. I think we all take it seriously. We've all spent a lot of time with the land use plan and amending the land use plan and discussing the land use plan. But I think there's many of us that really refer to the land use plan with rezoning. I don't see any harm in letting the community, the property owner as well as the area residents, see if they can work through a solution that's maybe better than our solution is with this.
I'm going to say this. What this change does is it communicates that the community wants a residential feel, at least a residential feel, that if leaving it, we can't kick this can down the road. I'm asking us to make this decision tonight because this has been going on since November of '21. These people came in. They had their, we did a workshop for them. We culled that information that we got from them, data down to, and had another workshop in March. And this is going on a year and a half now, almost, well, this communicates that they want this to be, they want the transition, they want this to have a residential feel. Doesn't mean it can't be changed. We amend the land use plan all the time. The community still can get together in the 60 to 90 days and come up with an agreement. And when they do their zoning request, they amend the land use plan, and it all goes hand in hand. We know how this works. But this communicates what the residents have at this point said, this is what we're comfortable with until a plan is on the table. I think we need to proceed forward with this. We cannot keep putting these residents in limbo, saying, okay, we're just going to do it another 60, 90 days. And quite frankly, I think I'll pull my hair out for my residents that I'm representing if we delay this another 60 to 90 days. We just need to make this decision, and then the community can come back together and have this conversation, and we can get that land use plan changed again if they're so if the community wants to get together and do that. So I'm begging you guys, please, let's adopt this tonight.
I will have 350 people's input, not 35, which is what the workshop had. I will literally guarantee to you all tonight documented and recorded input from at least 350 people. I will go door to door in Foxton, where I grew up, where my parents still live. I know hundreds of neighbors in there. I will literally go door to door and document this. I will hold workshops at 6 p.m., not 1 p.m. on a Tuesday when nobody can show up, literally after work hours. I will do this to every community you all ask. I will email each and every one of you and copy you on all the input that I'm getting. But it's important to do this right. I'm giving you that pledge this evening. 35 people is a good representation. How big is Farragut? 35,000?
We had 70, and more than 70 show up for the first one.
I'll have
We
350.
can't keep going back and forth like this. Rita.
Other people
Yeah,
have
let's-
signed
I
up
think
to
maybe we should
speak.
hear if we have some other representatives and kind of.
And again, we're asking for R3 on the majority of this, which is residential. It will have a residential aspect. There's no doubt about it.
And keep in mind that the speakers are limited to 5 minutes.
Sorry about that.
I do, you were fine. I do have a clock on my computer. I'll let you know if it's within 30 seconds. But the next speaker is Doug Horn. Do you want to speak, Doug?
Does someone else want to speak?
There's one more for this item. Okay. Michael Wilson.
Good evening, Michael Wilson, 412 Eisenhower Street, Farragut, Tennessee. I appreciate the transition that's happening from the commercial on Kingston Pike back to Baldwin Park. in the way that this has been laid out. I do have some concerns, particularly about the orange block right behind the store. So our low-density residential on Table 3.1 in the land use plan equates to R4, R5 zoning. If we look at R4, that's attached single-family residential. That would be similar to, I'm guessing, I think it's Chapel Hill, Chapel Place, there just off of Grigsby Chapel. R5 would be two-family residential, which would essentially be a duplex. What we don't have is what Mark affectionately returns to as the missing middle. Cottage-style homes, townhomes. We don't have a residential zoning district that adequately covers those types of development. So I think if you do adopt this, I couldn't imagine, short of a duplex, placing an attached single-family home behind that buffer space, looking at the back of a grocery store, and someone wanting to drop $400,000, $450,000, $500,000 to buy it. Now, if you put a townhome in there, maybe a little higher density, maybe 5 or 6 units per acre in a 4-unit building, if that could be written into the R5 zoning ordinance, that to me would be a more suitable use, and then transition from that down into a single-family attached or single-family detached as you move towards Baldwin Park. So I think beyond changing this use in the plan, even some of the recommendations that town staff has for cottage-style homes or townhomes really isn't feasible with the zoning districts we have. So as you think about how you're going to change this future land use map, I would also say that you need to take a look at the R4, R5 zoning ordinance and make the applicable changes in language there with the text amendment to include townhomes, cottage-style homes, whatever that kind of language the town staff would recommend. Thank you.
And then the last person signed up for this is Doug Horn.
Thank you, Doug Horn, 12103 South Fox Den. I'm like Michael, we've lived there for 40 years. Farragut people through and through. I think Michael made a good point to meet with Fox Den, Village Green, Kingsgate. I know Baldwin Park and John Holstrider, we've certainly talked to him quite a bit lately. There were a few people in Baldwin Park that opposed our proposal here from day one, but that's not the only group in the community, Mr. Chairman. You have Fox Den, Village Green, Kingsgate, Waverly Court, which we've heard no complaints from Waverly Court. And we, as Michael said, we've compromised to go back to R3 on all the property except for the S1 12-acre piece, S1 behind the old Ingalls. The property between Baldwin Park and Waverly Court, we do not want OSMR. We'll accept R3. We don't want to do OSMR. What we're trying to do with the S1 healthcare facility, which we've had a lot of people call us and say this is great that you proposed an S1 that was approved by this commission 6-3, because what they want is competitive pricing on healthcare, assisted living, memory care. We certainly have a need for this. We have a company out of Roanoke, Virginia that you've met, Smith Packet, that would invest $70 million to build a healthcare facility. This is for all the community, all 25,000 people. It's not just for a few people in Baldwin Park. Jack Farrell, by the way, who lives in Baldwin Park, right on the lot beside the property we're talking about, he lives on the south side. He's 100% for this. He's an old military guy, served in the Air Force for 30 years, and he's all for this. So there are people, even in Baldwin Park, that are for this. But Village Green, Fox Den, Smith Packet had meetings with them, Michael, you remember, and we had no complaints from Fox Den, Village Green. There are a few people, again, in Baldwin Park that were after us on this. And I know Louise objected to it, but the fact is this is good for the community, and the land use plan, Ms. Chair Lady, does affect the zoning decisions. There's been a lot of cases in Farragut that when you look at zoning, you say, well, what does the land use plan call for? And that's the danger of changing the land use plan. It inhibits the landowner. We've owned this property for 45 years, and we've been through a lot of turmoil with this too. It's not just the homeowners that live in Baldwin Park or some other close-by place. We've been through tribulation on this too. So we've suffered as well going through all this process. So what we've proposed now is a zoning request for S1 so we can have competitive healthcare fees for mothers and fathers, grandparents, aunts and uncles that the community will love. And all the community had a lot of people say that this is something that's very necessary to have. But we've compromised again and make all the land around it R3. That's what we're going to ask for, R3. Thank you.
That's all that signed up for this.
Okay. Does anybody else in the planning commission have any questions or comments now?
I'm going to move to approve PC Resolution PC 23-07.
Have a second?
Yes. I will second.
Second.
Let me do a roll call vote on that. Hold on one second. All right, the motion is to approve Resolution PC-23-07. Commissioner Myers?
Nay.
Commissioner Preston?
Aye.
Commissioner Russ?
Aye.
Mayor Williams?
Mayor Williams, yes.
Chairman Holliday?
Aye.
Vice Chairman St. Clair?
No.
Vice Mayor Pavlin?
Yes.
Commissioner Green?
No.
Motion passes by a vote of 5-3.
So it's 5-4, Mark?
5-3. 5-3.
Ron's not here.
Ron Pinchuk's not here. 5-3. Yep.
Well, normally he has something to say. Seven.
You ready, Mark? Ready to move on? Okay. Item number 7, discussion on a request to amend the Farragut future land use map for 11500 Kingston Pike from mixed-use town center and medium-density residential to commercial and low-density residential. 64.34 acres, Hy-Vee, Inc. applicant.
Yes, this agenda item and agenda item number 8 are related. This is the future land use map element of the request, and agenda item 8 is the zoning map amendment. This is for workshop discussion purposes only. The item involves a request to amend the future land use map for the property located at 11500 Kingston Pike, which is just west of the town hall. Currently, roughly about 2/3 of this parcel is designated as mixed-use town center on the future land use map. And to the south of that, you've got a mixture of medium-density residential, open space, and low-density residential. The applicant's request would remove the mixed-use town center land use designation from this property. And as you may remember, a similar request, they have revised the concept and a narrative, but a similar request was withdrawn back at the November 17th, 2022 meeting. And now their applicant is asking to maybe revisit this and get some feedback on, I guess, the latest concept that they're looking at. At the staff developer meeting, the staff indicated that at this time we wouldn't be able to support any changes to the future land use map that relate to the mixed-use town center, because hopefully next month we'll be working with a consultant that will be engaging our community specific to the mixed-use town center land use area, part of the town. And that's a several-month process that is scheduled to be completed March 31st, 2024. There will be a professional services agreement going to the Board of Mayor and Alderman next Thursday for the consultant that the staff is recommending to lead this effort. So the staff's thought on this is that since obviously this is the largest undeveloped tract in the mixed-use town center, it would be premature to make any changes to the mixed-use town center area in general at this time until this community engagement process is able to be completed. Certainly the applicant is encouraged and welcome to be a participant in this process, but until we really gauge the community again on this town center, the idea of the downtown, it just would seem to be premature to take any action, particularly on the largest undeveloped parcel in the mixed-use town center currently. So that's kind of the staff's position on this. The applicant is here and they can go through what they want to present. But that's the general layout that's on the screen at this time. And when you're ready, I do have a couple of individuals that have signed up to speak on this item.
Does anybody on the planning commission have any questions of Mark? The applicant.
Good evening, Phil Hoy, 5800 West Town Parkway, West Des Moines, Iowa. Thank you for your time again in front of you. We do have a new concept, and we are aware of staff's position and your all's process that you're embarking on to garner new feedback from the community on what the vision should be for this particular area. I understand the need to do that from time to time. It's unfortunate for us, the timing of that hits so close to when we've made our application, but nonetheless, I understand that that's a process you're embarking on. So what you choose to do with our application in relation to that is obviously for you to make that choice. We would appreciate, I just have a few comments. I want to talk a little bit about how this plan is different than our last. And from our perspective anyway, and I appreciate the thoughts about including us in the process or being involved however we can be in the process. Of course, we don't have unlimited time or control of the property, so we would be somewhat limited in our ability to participate in a meaningful way for that reason. So that is why we would request this evening just for some feedback from this group as far as your thoughts on this, whether or not this is a plan that, as it stands today, you see merit in. I understand this is a discussion item and maybe not ability to vote on it, but we would appreciate your feedback nonetheless, if that is at all possible. The major difference between this plan and, well, there's several differences between this plan and the last plan that you saw. One of the major differences is our application. So the previous application that we submitted was more for a straight zoning type for this property, which one of the issues with that was if it was approved, then the zoning was changed and whatever concept plan we had could also change. So there wasn't a lot of as much trust in the plan because it could change. But what we're proposing now is a planned commercial development district zoning, which really gives control back to the community, to staff, and to the voting bodies as far as what actually can go here once the zoning has been changed. It's more of an iterative process, and Mr. Shipley can walk through a little bit of how that control comes back to you, but that was really the piece that we were looking for. We were willing to have this be a collaborative process, and this zoning would allow for that to happen. The other major difference here, you'll see our food store itself got quite a bit smaller, right around 110,000 square feet now, down from 150 is a major change. So the buildings that we have up along Kingston Pike, how we've designed those buildings has also been modified. One of the other more significant changes that you'll see is the downtown area that, thank you for that. So this is a schematic of a potential design of what this streetscape could look like adjacent to the Hy-Vee food store. So again, this is an idea of what it could look like. And through the planned commercial development district, we could change this however this group seemed suited to change it and modify it. R4 is the zoning that we proposed for the back of the site. Again, that a lower density residential for that portion. Just like the last plans, we have lots of green space and buffers from the residential. We've also pulled back some of the impact to the homes by drawing that road back to the east sooner and pulling back the commercial from that area as soon as we could to lessen the impact and create a larger buffer area between any commercial and the residential. Of course, the connections, the road connections, traffic is a big concern anywhere in your community, and something I'm sure we'll hear about this evening if anybody comes up to speak on this item. The connections that existed in the last plan to relieve some of that traffic pressure exist in this plan as well. Of course, all the things that were in the Hy-Vee store, all the things about Hy-Vee are still relevant. We didn't talk a lot about those in the previous meetings. There wasn't a lot of discussion, I think, about that. What makes Hy-Vee special? I'm willing to go more into that if you feel that is relevant. But really, we wanted to come back with a plan that tried to address some of the major concerns from the previous plans that we had. Smaller building, adding a downtown area, and creating a zoning that gives the control back to the community as far as how this is designed and ultimately how it is built out once the zoning is approved.
Does anybody have any questions?
Do we have people signed up for this?
I do. Yep. Just whenever you're ready. Are you
Does
ready
anybody
for
in the planning commission have any questions
any.
first?
Not at this time.
the different phasing? I'm just scrolling through that. And it's, of course, the first phase is the Hy-Vee building and the fuel center up front, which actually the PCD, the fuel center would have to be somewhere else because it can't be, it has to be internal to the site, but that's a on down the road question. The second phase is the building up near Kingston Pike, the retail building, and then the 3As, the kind of the downtown buildings. And I think those are forecast to take maybe a 20-year time frame on that.
Yes, part of the PCD application process, we're required to provide a phasing plan and a potential timeline. So that is, again, a hypothetical timeline. We don't know the phasing or the timing, I should say, if this is a 20-year build out or a 10-year build out or a 30-year build out. As you all have recognized, your town is very highly regarded. Lots of folks want to build here. That's a good thing. So I'd imagine the timing on this would be sooner rather than later. But you all see the interest of folks wanting to come through your community and build. So I'm sure the timing would be inside of 20 years, but nonetheless, we had to provide an idea of what it could be as part of the application process.
And you get the townhomes in phases 3B, and then 3C is a public park, and then the last phase is, or at least last phase in this layout is single-family lots on the far south end of the property. ready for the speakers?
Yeah.
Okay. First one is Jeannie Brikowski. For Jeannie, I have Michael Wilson.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jeannie Brykolski. I live in the Bel Air neighborhood on Crestview Road. I'm here as a private citizen and also as a member of the Farragut Neighborhood Preservation Partnership. And when we're looking at this new proposal, I hope that the FMPC, looking at this, looking down the road when a more definitive plan comes together, will continue to support the town of Farragut's vision that was initiated decades ago by our town's founders. And part of this vision was protecting our families and residents of Farragut's residential neighborhoods from inappropriate, incompatible, and invasive development. I think it would be safe to say that our founders never envisioned the concept of big box stores, much less the impact they can have on the landscape, traffic, and neighborhoods in our community, or what happens when they close and remain empty and derelict for years, as we've seen happen. Now, I did attend the May 2nd staff developer meeting, and I was pleased to see that Hy-Vee, after many months of neighbors and so forth coming forward, had listened and seemed to grasp the concept that the plan that they were presenting was not a good one or a good fit for the town of Farragut. However, I still have questions and concerns. One of these is the long-range building, 20-year construction project in the middle of a residential neighborhood. I've done some research about Hy-Vee on the internet, about when they have gone into other communities and built other stores in the middle of residential neighborhoods. And the people there opposed it and felt that their quality of life was, and their property values were affected negatively. There's also been a few stores that they have closed. And there was also a piece of property, and I can't remember off the top of my head where it was exactly, but they bought it. And 10 years later is when they finally built on it. And during that time, the empty lot had a problem with people dumping trash, homeless encampments, and so forth. So these are concerns that I have. And also, going ahead and changing the zoning when we know that they're not going to be keeping the entire property. They're going to be selling off quite a bit of it. And they did mention something about doing a PCD, that would be better guarantee that whatever their vision, their concept was, that whoever bought it would have to abide by it. And that I'm still not 100% on, because that doesn't seem 100% legal or feasible to me. So as we are going forward to look at plans, I think there's still a lot of questions that we need to ask and a lot of things that we need answers for. And one concern I do have is the little pavilion on the west side of the property there. I have friends who live in Glen Abbey, and based on where that particular pavilion is going to be 100 feet from several Glen Abbey's homes. Not property lines, homes. So obviously, this plan still is not what you would call Farragut residential friendly. Now, the Ford property is a big opportunity, and the CLUP is important to our community. And it's imperative that we do the research and include the community when considering making any type of changes or variances to this property or any other. And it's critical that we get it right. especially for the Ford property, as it is the largest, mostly empty piece of property left in Farragut. I'm very glad to know that we are going to be having a consultant come in, and we're going to have another public engagement process, and that the town is going to be taking this very seriously. That's something I, on a personal level, appreciate. Anyway, I just wanted to reiterate a couple of things, and that's it. Y'all have a good evening.
Next speaker is Michael Wilson. And that is all that signed up for this item.
Good evening again, Michael Wilson, 412 Eisenhower Street, Farragut, Tennessee. I want to address two things regarding Hy-Vee's request. The first is the developer's due process rights, and the second is removal of the mixed-use town center overlay that would be required. So first, after the Biddle Farm approval, there was a great deal of discussion regarding an applicant's right to timely due process. This was one of the reasons stated for not pausing the Biddle Farm process to conduct the significant public outreach that I and many others asked for at the time. Like the Biddle Farm situation, Hy-Vee has been discussing and revising their request based on our feedback for several months now. Based on the Biddle Farm precedent, it seems the town should conduct the appropriate hearings to discuss and vote on this current proposal in a timely fashion. I understand the BOMA will discuss a contract to complete the mixed-use town center significant public outreach at their next meeting. It might be prudent to discuss the timing of the public outreach process to ensure that the Hy-Vee consideration is not unduly influenced by that process. This would ensure that the due process rights are applied equitably to both contractors and developers. Second, I believe removing the mixed-use town center overlay to allow 115,000 square foot grocery store is a major update as defined in the comprehensive land use plan. Adoption of all major changes call for the town to complete the significant public outreach process. Based on Mr. Shipley's comments tonight, it appears that the town staff is in agreement with that approach. I asked the Planning Commission to discuss the MUTC overlay removal and determine if there is consensus that this removal is indeed considered a major update. That decision is critical to the remainder of the discussion on this proposal. If you agree that the removal is a major update, then the Hy-Vee proposal should be voted down as a 115,000 square foot commercial building is not consistent with the MUTC portion of the C1 zoning ordinance. Finally, I want to thank the town for engaging in a significant public outreach process for the mixed-use town center area. I have advocated for this outreach for the last 2.5 years. It is clear from multiple discussions over the last 2.5 years that the vertical mixed-use type development is no longer viable. Additionally, the current O1 zoning on the Ford property between the south end of the coal store to the entrance to Park Place, that O1 zoning would allow for office buildings to be placed on that property immediately adjacent to Glen Abbey. That would impact 10 to 12 homes. The O1 zoning requirement only requires a 25-foot buffer strip when adjacent to a residential neighborhood. So if Glen Abbey is not happy with the park and the pavilion, and they're not happy with the commercial and what else is going in here, I think we really need to come together as a community and talk about what office buildings with a 25-foot buffer space, how they would prefer that. But that's current zoning. So we have a lot to discuss on this property, and I'm glad it's finally coming in front of the town. And I look forward to the meetings and discussing and providing input on what might be viable for this area and the rest of the mixed-use town center. Thank you.
That's all that's signed up to speak on this.
So, does anybody else have any questions or comments from the Planning Commission at this point now?
I would just add to what the staff's position has been on this. We have been discussing a hiring consultant. We discussed this at our February 22 budget retreat for fiscal year 23. this was one of the goals we wanted to do, was hire a consultant. We knew that this is a big undertaking. We need the residents involved. We need an outside perspective of a consultant to help guide us as a community as to what can be accomplished here, what are their visions. It's been a bit of a process, but we do have a right to plan. As a community, we have a right to plan, and we have a right to pause for a period of time to plan. We did hear their original request, and we didn't have any of the consultant or any of that heard at that point. We did hear their original request, and they withdrew it. So we need to finish up this process of updating our land use plan. It's too important. And this is, as Ms. Brokowski said, a very important piece of our community that we need to have a good, clear idea of what we want to do with it.
Does anybody else have any questions or comments?
I would say just procedurally, if you want us to put this on for a vote next month, you can let me know, or if not, you'll need to withdraw it. But like Mr. Wilson says, we do want to provide the due process. Somebody submitted an application, and we need to take action on it unless they withdraw their request.
Right. But for tonight, it was for discussion only.
Just discussion tonight, right?
Then, any more questions or comments?
If I'm willing, if I can ask, is it possible to have any more dialogue from the group? I understand you want to hear from your community and a broader process for this parcel. Are you able to provide any additional feedback on this plan as it sits today as a group?
Well, my initial thoughts were I didn't see a lot of, I appreciate all the work that you're working towards getting that goal, but again, we need the feedback from our community and the due diligence. But I voted no against it. I was withdrawn. But 150,000 square feet to 110, I don't see the transition that we're looking for Park Place and Glen Abbey and the surrounding area. And I think that the traffic impact study will bear that it's going to be a heavy burden on that intersection.
I'll say this much, 110,000 square foot building is a big building, and more than likely, the lifespan of big boxes needs to be considered, because someday this building may be empty, and that's something we got to think about. But the bigger problem I have is you've put this, what is very big box, big grocery store parking lot. That's a suburban structure, and you're proposing this very urban form of development that it leads into. We have a page in our land use plan that talks about great places have distinctive character, one that sets it apart from its context but does not alienate it. And these two things together seem in conflict with each other. And also that it's a 20-year build-out tells me that there really is no one there to build out this other portion of the vertical mixed-use building. So that's why we've put a 20-year plan on it, and so I have concerns about that. Is it really even buildable? So if it's not buildable, and we find that out, we approve a plan, commercial development, and it has to come back to us for amendment. But now if we would go ahead with this, we'd have this high V, and we'd have this blank spot, and we're putting in a future MPC and a future Board of Mayor and Aldermen in a sticky situation of what do we do with the rest of this land if this is in fact not buildable? So I have some concerns about the reality, or is this realistic, this portion of the plan that, and quite frankly, that's a lot of square footage of retail. When it's all said and done, it's over 200,000 square feet of retail in an area that only has really at this point, two access points. One of them cannot be widened. The Municipal Center Drive can't be widened. It's got a drainage easement, or a wetland that we can't interfere with. So most of it, the access would be from the Kingston Pike, and that's overwhelming as well. So those are just more looking at this plan, and those are my concerns.
Anybody else have any questions or comments now?
Well, you just let me know what you want to do when you have a chance to talk about it.
Thank
That
you.
way I can put it on the agenda.
So item number 8, discussion,
It's really related to 7, as I mentioned
Yes.
earlier, so I don't think there's any
Tied together.
discussion on that.
Really want to go into it anymore.
yeah. We need to.
I mean, they've got a right to present something else on here. if they
Yeah.
desire.
And
Yeah.
you get my, the key point. Yeah, get that.
I'm waiting
rest
for
to
Mark.
win. And then what is all that traffic?
Do we have speakers on number 8?
Okay.
Then it's up to the applicant then if they want to.
Have nothing on 8. 8 is same as 7, really, basically. It's just a map, zoning map versus future land use, but it's all the same.
So can we move on to number 9 then?
Give me an opportunity.
Yes.
I appreciate the opportunity. I would agree with staff. I think they're related items, unless there's any additional thoughts on this second item, item 8, that's different than 7, or any other thoughts or comments that you think would be relevant for us to hear. We'd take those, if there are any.
Thank you, Phil.
Thank you.
So again, that was for discussion only, so there will be no vote.
Right. That's
Ready?
right, we're ready for the
Okay.
next one.
Item number 9, discussion on a request for approval of a proposed 160-foot tall microcellular tower to be situated in the northeast corner of the West End Center at 156 West End Avenue, Zone C-1. Vogue Towers Partner 7 LLC applicant.
And this is also for discussion purposes only. This request involves approval for a site plan for the installation of a new macro cellular tower. As proposed, it would be kind of in the northeast portion of the West End Center development. As most of you probably are well aware, there's currently poor cellular service in and around the schools and that general part of town. And originally, the applicant was trying to work with the school system to get the tower placed on the school property. They were unable to secure that agreement, and so then they were forced to look at adjacent properties that were relatively close to where the need was, so they tried to reach out to different property owners in the area, and they ended up securing a lease agreement with the owner of the West End Center. The location for the tower is shown there on the screen, and this is the West End Center building that has the Goodwill. Basically, the Goodwill drop-off areas back here. So it's just to the northeast of the Goodwill drop-off area behind the West End Center building on the east side of West End Avenue. The tower itself, get to that, is proposed to be, let me go through these. It's a 160-foot tower, and the applicant is trying to place it in as discreet a location as possible, and that's why they're trying to tuck it in that part of the West End Center. Originally, as far as the site plan goes, they had showed the tower pretty close to the property line at this intersection. And there's some existing mature trees along these property lines, some very large pine trees through here, for example. And one of the provisions in the antennas and towers section of the zoning ordinance is that you're not to remove tree cover for the installation of a cellular tower. So with that comment, they have moved it in kind of a southwest direction, and this is actually where the tower is proposed now, right there. And then you can see the enclosure around the tower. A couple of things that were talked about with the staff developer meeting. There is a requirement in our antennas section of the zoning ordinance for a stealth application on these cellular towers. They are now proposing a monopine tower. I can show you what that looks like in a minute. There was also discussion about the fence enclosure around the compound, and they have made that a masonry wall, a 8-foot masonry wall around the facility. The adjusted tower still does not meet the required setbacks that are in our zoning ordinance. And neither does the enclosure area that's around the tower. The Planning Commission, however, does have, within the language of the zoning orders, the ability to grant waivers to requirements associated with these kind of towers. And the reason for that is when we updated those provisions, these towers can sometimes be a challenge to site. So the commission is given the authority to consider the context, the need for the service, and if they feel that it's necessary, they can waive certain requirements. So the setbacks would be an example of something that the Planning Commission could potentially entertain. I would say that with the tower's location now, the fall zone, which is 64 feet from the tower, a radius of 64 feet around the tower, is contained all on the west end center property. Originally, that fall zone extended over into the school property and the Farragut Golf and Games property to the east, which is here. So they've also got that on the west end center property. It would not fall on the building. And towers don't really just fall over anyway. They're designed to collapse within themselves. And then a portion would kind of slump down, and that's that radius around the tower, the fall zone. In this case, it's 64 feet based on the 160-foot tall pole that they're proposing. So again, the Planning Commission has the ability to consider the context. Frankly, if a tower is needed in this general area, which I think the applicant has demonstrated there is a need for improved cellular service given the schools. It's in the town center area where we're going to see a lot of future development. It's in a pretty discrete location. If you were to move the tower further east, you're going to get closer to residential lots. Currently, the nearest house to this tower is about 1,190 feet to the actual house. That's on Admiral Road. If you tried to move the tower further to the north, then again we get into that fall zone being on other properties, and they can't put it on the school property. They were unable to work that out. If you move it further to the west, then it's situated in the parking lot of West End Center and in more visible and heavily used location. And the same way with if you moved it further to the south, you're also going to get closer to the building, and that fall zone may get within the building itself of West End Center. So I think the context is there for the Planning Commission to consider that with the siting of this particular pole. They are going to have to make some modifications to an existing stormwater detention basin that the pole would be is proposed to be partly within, and the compound around it. So they are going to have to work with the town and the town engineer to figure out how to address that and ensure that it's not creating any issues and doesn't compromise the original design and function of that detention basin. So to show you what and this is kind of the zoning around that general area, the tower is roughly here. It's on commercial zone property. I would say it's at the corner, kind of the very northeast corner of the mixed-use town center, and the mixed-use town center doesn't allow macro towers either. But that's another thing that the Planning Commission can consider if they're wanting to waiver from that requirement. School is currently zoned residential, so it has different setbacks, greater setbacks for the tower. That's why their waiver from the setbacks from the school would be significantly greater than the property to the east, which is the Farragut Golf and Games. And all the property south and east is zoned commercial as well. This is kind of a diagram showing the existing coverage, the dark areas are existing coverage, and then you can see how those dark areas around the schools expand with this tower being situated there, the schools, and really out even toward the town center, the Biddle Farms development. Again, some of the other maps showing the service centers. This is a diagram showing existing poles in the nearby area. There's, of course, the one down on Concord Road, the other monopine. The one they're proposing here, there's one just to the north of Concord Hills in that area. There's also one up here along the interstate. They're not showing that, but it's not within a 1 mile radius. These are some visual simulation images to show what the monopine would look like that they're proposing. What they're proposing is a much wider monopine than what is on Concord Road. I guess the technology has improved over the years. This one actually looks pretty much like a pine tree on steroids. It's pretty stealth. And these are some images looking at it from a distance. This is from the Farragut Golf and Games, looking at it from to the west. On Admiral, Sonia and Admiral, you could barely see it from there. And then from the school property, the access road going in. And that's kind of a larger version of what it would look like. This is a pole in an existing location with a similar arrangement to what they're proposing.
I will say, at least from you can't, that's as good as it's going to get. And
yeah, it's pretty still.
For as long as we've been hearing, the residents are really, I mean, the schools need this, the residents need this, anyone traveling through this area needs this because your calls drop. So the businesses, I don't know that we have an option, really.
I think we ought to look at the waivers and make it happen, quite
Yeah.
frankly. As a victim, I mean, a service user.
Yeah.
I can tell you, back before I
honest
learned how to
individual.
use Teams, I mean, and go on the internet as opposed to use my cell connections for meetings, I could tell you exactly every class change and soccer
yeah.
mob going to and from the school to pick up kids or drop off kids. I mean, I could set my clock by it. And I live, right almost underneath that Concord Hills tower, and there's times where you just can't get any service, whatever. So I was very encouraged to see this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The applicant is here if you have any technical or more specific questions
This
that I
is
may
just a
not be able.
discussion tonight?
Yes, it is.
So can I ask, just out of curiosity, why was this not up for a vote? What's the process here?
Well, because you had to, whether you were open to the waivers, because that's a big
Okay.
consideration.
Okay,
It's not just like they came in, it was something that met all the requirements.
Yeah.
So I had
Okay.
to
I think you're gonna
I
get a
had to
better location.
present it
and
as a
coverage you
workshop
need.
so that
It's
they
more
have
of a-
guidance on, you're comfortable with the placement, with
Yeah.
the waivers that they might need
just,
for
I'm
this.
just curious, thank you.
And then they can move forward, because they're gonna have to make some adjustments with that detention basin.
Yeah.
And then their lease agreement also, I think, is the original location, they'll have to amend that.
Okay,
But
So we
that
can
was the reason.
anticipate that next month, or?
Yeah, I would suspect we'll have it on for a vote next month.
Does it have to go to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, or is it just a decision?
No, it's just a planning commission decision.
Okay.
Yep.
How much room's between it and the building, the corner there?
Between the West End Center building,
The Goodwill corner and,
Past that radius, whatever.
yeah,
that
it's
radius
probably 75 feet. Let's
Oh,
look
that
at
far?
that. Yeah, because the 64
toward that
feet
corner.
is
Yeah, so you got another
this
5 or
dash
10
line,
feet
that's
or something.
64. So it's probably another 10 to 12 feet, maybe. Probably 75, roughly.
okay. And the drainage goes right beside that?
The detention basin's, current detention basin's actually right in here.
Yeah, there's actually a culvert over in the, let's see, on that circle at
here.
about 2 o'clock.
They're gonna have
two
to,
o'clock.
It's in the middle of the detention basin.
yeah,
And-
it is. Yeah.
I do have concerns about where the water's going to go, and
Yeah.
there's a slope on the east side of this that goes down to Farragut Golf and
Off
Games.
the games, yeah.
And I want to make sure that slope doesn't get destabilized with changing the water drainage patterns.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
You
I
may have
mean,
to
and
put a
it may
culvert-
not be ready for a vote if they don't have that worked out, because
Okay.
I think we need a little bit more work before we look at this again.
Work it out.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the biggest thing as far as the site is getting that detention basin addressed.
Well,
and
certainly,
making-
that's Darrell. Darrell will be looking really hard at that, correct?
Well, they'll have to have an engineer present something for Darrell
Okay.
and staff to look at.
Yes, understood.
There's a lot of volume in that detention basin today. Somehow they're going to have to mitigate that volume some other way, and the only way I know how to do that is to do some sort of underground drainage structures.
It could
And I'd
be.
be surprised if an underground drainage structure can support the geotechnical side of that, of a cell tower directly on top of it. So there's definitely some things that are going to have to be worked out with this.
Okay.
Is there enough room to do what Noah's talking about and move that detention basin over?
Yeah, you're going to take out some trees to do it. I mean, any direction you go, you're going to have to take out trees with that detention basin if you're going to keep it a traditional detention basin.
Well, there's a time when.
I think that's just
I think the
something that they're
need
gonna have to
overrules
look
a
at
few
and
trees
present
in
us
that
with
little
a
location.
I'm
proposal.
not saying it can't be done.
Yeah, no,
I'm just saying it's complicated,
yeah,
and there's going to be some engineering design that's going to need to be scrutinized as part of that
absolutely.
process.
yep, absolutely, yep. Bit of this is it does get that fall zone on the one property where they have the lease agreement, and it also protects those larger pine trees that are along the school property, and the putt-putt golf and games properties.
Yeah, what's the quality of that tree down through there, Noah?
The quality?
Yeah, that tree where you would have to move the detention to.
You know, if you move the detention to the south, there's a mixture of some deciduous and evergreens in there. The evergreens, they are big, mature pine trees.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to think that those pine trees are going to make it another 30 or 40 years, just because pine trees they're fast growers, they're not as strong, and they just don't have the lifespan that a hardwood tree does. So eventually some of those pines over on the in all transparency, I own the property to the east of this, which is Farragut Golf and Games. So I mean, so there's no, anyway, I do own the property anyway.
We knew that.
And so, but anyway, I think there's a way to skin the cat. Obviously, there's a need. This is not close to any homeowners. I mean, if there was a spot in the town of Farragut where this makes sense, I think it makes sense here. I wish they could have worked out a deal with the school, because the school has a lot of property which seems like it would be a better candidate, but I understand the politics involved and how difficult that is. So at any rate, if they can solve these issues that we've talked about, I'm comfortable with what you didn't call them variances. What did you call them? The waivers?
The waivers, that's how it's worded.
With some of these waivers that we're talking about, but trying to move forward, and I think it's a good design. It's a good stealth design. I advocated for the other stealth design, and so it makes sense. I'm probably most concerned about the storm drainage.
You already looked at it?
You didn't have to sign up, Michael, but you can speak if you want to, since you're an applicant.
Oh, we got show and tell.
Yeah, just the things that's a need, that's ways a few trees.
Yeah.
Good evening. My name's Michael Sandifer. I'm at 100 North Point Center East in Alpharetta, Georgia. I represent Vogue Towers along with the CEO of Vogue Towers here tonight, Pat Tant. Yes, so following the meeting on the 2nd, there were some changes and some directives made. One was making the fall zone stay on top, on the subject parcel there, which we did by moving it. The downside of that, the sacrifice of that was moving it into that retention area, which is going to have to be designed and engineered now to maintain the same volume. One of the others was the pine, which you saw that, and I also have some boards of that. You saw that, if y'all are interested in looking into that. Mayor, you had asked for the pine tree along with, instead of the chain link fence, something different there. And there was concerns about there was some questions on the fall zone as well, and I've got a board of that if you are interested in looking at it.
Tommy Van, have you discussed this with him?
The site? Or the changes? The changes, yeah. Yes.
Okay. So, and he's good?
Mhm.
Okay, great. That's what we need to know.
Anybody else have any questions of the applicants?
That's all I need to know.
Want to be up for a vote, you may or may not be ready, given what you have to do
I
with
know.
that basin, so, I was just kind of looking at the calendar here. Just get with me sometime next couple of days.
Okay.
And see if, it may be July before y'all realistically are ready, given
Right.
what you have to do with that.
I'll get with you on the deadline to be able to have it on
Okay,
June.
yeah, yeah.
Great.
That prompts a question for me. How long from the time it's approved till it's working?
So it's up. So there's some federal regulatory due diligence that has to be done on tower sites in order to develop them.
That just shocks me. And I'm sure it takes like a year.
It can take a while sometimes. So we're probably still several months away from doing that and having all those completed. Assuming we get the zoning approval, say July, probably another, I would say maybe another 4 months after that to be able to have the federal approvals and then be able to be in a position to be looking at construction.
Depends on the amount of time it's going to take to mitigate the drainage.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the application actually will not be considered complete until we get the retention area
Yeah.
settled, because you do have a shot clock on acting on these, but it has to be a completed application. So once we get that and we're all in agreement with that, then the planning commission will need to take action on the request.
He's aware of the shot clock?
Well, it's in our ordinance for 60 days, but that's once an application is complete. So that's kind of currently an incomplete element of the submittal, because we know there's things that need to be submitted to make sure that that's doable.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate you coming.
Thank you.
Okay,
Utilities and citizens forum.
yeah. Item number 10, are you ready, Mark?
Yes,
Approval of utilities.
I do not have any.
And number 11, citizens forum. Is there anybody?
Do not have anyone that signed up.
Okay. In that case, the May 18th, 2023 meeting of the Farragut Municipal Planning Commission is adjourned.
We've had a